Qomp is a one-button platformer made by Stuffed Wombat and a spiritual successor to the flash game Pong, released on Newgrounds 5 years ago, and the idea of the game is that you are the Pong ball, and you want to be free. When I think of one-button games, I think of things like Flappy Bird, endless arcade titles with very limited movement where the challenge is almost entirely about timing, and if I was timing how long I would happily play one for, it's a few minutes at most. And so Qomp has very quickly and very easily become my all-time favourite one-button game. The visual design in Qomp is excellent. It opens up with a level that Bennett Foddy would be proud of, with the developers' names all clearly displayed around the borders of the level. There's a curved old-school TV effect to mimic a screen that might have hosted the original Pong, distinct and clear designs of obstacles and items, and interesting backgrounds despite the minimalist grayscale design. Visual effects like screen shake add weight to what's on the screen, and even the camera is used superbly. In the gameplay, it holds on a single screen for as long as possible to let you aim your movement precisely, before quickly springing to the next part of the map. But even in a 2D top-down action platformer, the devs still find a way to use it artistically too, like this. I mean, how good is that transition for building up suspense for the next part of the game? The soundtrack is also strong, with music that gives a great atmosphere, and the frequent use of pronounced drum tracks adds an intensity that really suits a game where you are rhythmically smashing the same button over and over again. Qomp also plays really well and manages to create quite complex and engaging gameplay with just that use of a single button. So the square you control moves in 4 directions, all at 45 degrees to the horizontal. With your limited single button control, you can change the direction of travel by 90 degrees, but you only affect the vertical motion. You can switch between right and up and right and down, but to switch between moving left and moving right, you have to bounce off a wall. It ends up being something that Alan McManus would be good at, because to navigate Qomp's levels, you've got to think about the angles of where that Pong ball is going. And it's actually not immediately easy to get your head around. Frequently there will be situations where you're travelling down and right and hit the button in order to start moving down and left, still a 90-degree change of direction, but just not the change of direction the button actually allows. It's interesting. Qomp feels like a platformer when you play, but in platformers typically the challenge is about gaining elevation. But in Qomp that isn't an issue. In fact, in the right circumstances, you can maintain a pretty consistent height indefinitely. Instead, in Qomp, the challenge is combining the limited control of your movement with an awareness of the environment, because it's only a combination of the button you can press and the environment around you that allows you to move in all 4 directions. It's a clever approach to one-button game design because it gives players multiple things to concentrate on, even when only having a single way to interact with the game. It creates a movement system that has difficulty and its own interesting quirks, and because it's something slightly unusual that the player will improve at over the course of the game's 1 to 2 hour length, it's even something you can develop a mastery of, which is a key bit of satisfaction in movement-focused games. As you play, Qomp constantly gives you new twists on the mechanic and adds new ideas to the levels to build on these solid controls. There's water that dampens your bounce, pun fully intended, and rapidly hitting the button gives you a motion that's almost swimming. Adding inspiration from another old-school classic, there are sections where you enter a snake mode, which adds the difficulty of avoiding your own tail as you try to navigate to the next door. There's a part that takes the monorail chains that you use to finish and leave a level, and then turns them into the walls of a new one. As you'd expect, there are obstacles to avoid, like blocks in your path, spikes on walls, and more difficult versions of the 2 of them that move, but there are also keys that need to be collected and carried to doors without dying, buttons and generators that can be hit to make changes to the game world, opening up new sections to travel into. One of Qomp's favourite gimmicks is having a player move through a corridor to hit a button, which then adds tricky obstacles to navigate on the return trip. You'll be hit with that one half a dozen different times with half a dozen different obstacles. Some are like traps that activate if you move in front of them, and you might need to bait them out of position to get past. Some obstacles change with your button presses, adding an extra layer of complexity as you try to control your movement, while also keeping obstacles out of your way. The game even has an enemy. It's just a Pac-Man looking thing that chases you, but once again it's something different that adds something new to deal with. It's all about getting as much variety as possible out of the limited control scheme. Even though you've only got one button, you're really always having to think about what the consequences of pressing it are. Qomp is not an overly difficult game. You will die a lot, but the checkpoints are so frequent that you can immediately retry the trickier sections when you inevitably mess up in some way. And despite being a one-button game, the most accessible game design possible, Qomp still has accessibility options like an invincibility mode, the presence of which did not affect my enjoyment at all because it takes absolutely zero effort not to turn it on. But if you enjoy the game and then want it to be harder, completion unlocks challenges which add twists to the original level, like adding spike traps every single time you hit the button. And on top of all of that, Qomp even manages to feel good in its environmental storytelling. It does a good job of keeping that feel of escaping with its dungeon-esque appearance, and maintains the Pong paddles as your whimsical archenemy throughout. And once you reach the back end of the game, it rounds out its 1.5 hour playtime with a very satisfying set of final levels. Qomp is a game with wonderful variety that keeps introducing new ideas and mechanics and doesn't let any overstay its welcome. It has mechanical simplicity in its control scheme but maintains a complexity in its gameplay through interesting ideas and clever designs. And with all of that going on behind clean visuals and a decent soundtrack, what you end up with is a very satisfying precision platformer that pushes all the right buttons.